Hello and welcome. In this video, what I'd like to do is share with you a little bit of an experiment that I've done. And this is just to compare the different fabric hardeners that are out there available within the UK. Now, I've been creating using fabric hardeners to make fabric sculptures and also mixed media pieces for the last kind of 4 years, and I've been teaching it through that time as well. The brand that I started out with was Powertex, and it's probably the one that I'm still most familiar with. However, I have dabbled with all of the ones that I'm going to talk about today. So what brands am I comparing? The first one we've got here is Sculptin. It's a British company that makes Sculptin, and it's, I guess, the newest one to the market. It's been out for, I think, certainly over a year now, maybe coming up for 18 months to 2 years. It comes in a few different colours. So there's a brown, which is this one. There's also black and there's grey. They do a cream, a white, and also a brick red. So you've got a few different options for your colours with Sculpting. So the second one that I've got here is Paverpol. This one was developed in the early 1990s. So this one's been around for quite a while. Comes in a tub, as you can see, which is a little bit different to the others that come in bottles. And the range of colours you get with this one is, this is the bronze, which is a kind of brown colour. And then you also get a black, there's a grey, there's kind of a peachy skin colour, they call it, and also a transparent version of the Paverpol. The third one along here then is Powertex. This one kind of sits in the middle for how long it's been around, sort of since around about 2001. It's a Belgian brand. I say the Paverpol is a Dutch brand. So with Powertex, there's a much wider range of the colours available. So this is their bronze. So again, it's a brown colour. But they also do a black, grey, ivory, white, transparent. So kind of similar to the Paverpol, that part of the range. But they also do some more slightly bold colours. So there's a blue, there's a red, there's a yellow, there's a green, and there's a terracotta as well with the Powertex. And the one that I've got on the end here, this is actually my own formulation that I've made up myself. It's not available to buy, but obviously from my point of view, I just wanted to include it in my experiment so that I could see how it compares to the brands that are out there. So all of the fabric hardeners that I've got here, they are water-based. They all work much better with natural fibres than they do with synthetics. So they work really, really well with your cotton, wool, linen, viscose, those kind of things. They're weather resistant once they are fully cured, so you can make sculptures to go outside. They take approximately 3 weeks. So they tend to give a guide of somewhere between 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the brand. Before you can put your sculptures outside, but after that they are weather resistant. They come in slightly different size bottles, but they tend to be fairly consistent across the different brands. So you can get it in 250ml size, which is what you've got here. You can get them in 500 mils or grams. They quite often do it in weight rather than volume. So you've got your 500 ones, both of those are 500. They also come in litre sizes and also in 5 litre or 5,000 grams, 5 kilograms, if you're looking to do a lot or much bigger sculptures. So for my experiment, I'm using the brown version of each of them, as you might have picked up. So with Sculptin, it is called brown. With the Paverpol and the Powertex, they call it bronze. I'm using the brown because it's the colour that I use the most. It's absolutely my most favourite of the colours that are out there. It's a nice neutral base colour, which means that I can apply any colour of pigment onto it once I'm finished to get any colour of end result that I want. I also use grey quite a lot as well, and sometimes black. So all of the 3 brands there that I've got that are available, they all come in those kind of 3 key colours that I use, the brown, the grey and the black. Personally, I tend to avoid those bolder colours, like your red and your blue and your yellow. Even the kind of the brick red and the terracotta that you can get with some of them. I find with those, it's a lot harder when you actually come to colour them because you've got that strong base colour. You're a lot more limited with what you can apply onto them to actually really enhance the textures and add that extra bit of colour. I also tend to stay away from the light colours, so the ivory, the cream, the white, for fabric sculpting. I do use them for other mixed media type pieces, but certainly for the fabric sculpting where I want to use a dry brushing technique to colour them at the end, then I tend to avoid the ivory and the white. So on to the first bit of my experiment, which is quite simple. All I've done here, which is what you can see with those 4 pieces of fabric, is I've taken a smallish piece of white cotton t-shirt fabric. I've coated them with the different fabric hardeners. I've then scrunched them up and basically just left them. I've monitored them to just note how quickly the different hardeners actually harden up. And also that it's nice to see there the different range of colours that you get. Whilst they're all brown / bronze, which are essentially brown, they are quite a different range of shades there. You've got very, very dark with the Powertex. The next darkest would be the Sculptin, then probably just my own one there, and then the Paverpol being the lightest. What you might see there, if I pick it up and just show you a little bit closer, I'm not sure if the camera does pick it up very well. With the Paverpol, it does actually have just a very slight shimmer in it, almost like it's got I guess like a bronze mica powder or something within there. So you do get a little bit of a shimmer just with the Paverpol. So in terms of how much they hardened up, these I did probably about 5 days ago, I would think now. They're all very solid. They will bend a little bit if I really force them. I've scrunched them to give them a little bit of thickness there, so it's not just a flat piece of fabric, which will bend, whichever one you use. They always retain a little bit of bend to them. They are what's called thermoplastic, so particularly if they get warm, they will go a little bit soft and start bending. And if it's just a single piece of fabric, just one thickness on its own, then there will be some bending to it, or whatever one that you use. So that's why I've kind of scrunched them, just to give them a little bit more thickness and really feel how much they do harden up. So as I say, they've all gone pretty much as hard as each other. In terms of how quickly they hardened up, I would say the Powertex actually hardened up the quickest. Not too dissimilar to the Paverpol, but a little bit quicker with the Powertex. Then I would say it was mine, and then just slightly behind as well was the Sculptin. That probably took slightly longer. However, the way I work is I will do my sculpting on one day, leave them to dry overnight, and I'll come back to colour them the next day. So by that point, they were absolutely, all of them were hard enough and easy to put that colour onto. And then I'd say they all achieved their absolute final hardness after about 48 hours. But if you've done any fabric sculpting, you'll know that this isn't how you would normally use the hardener and how you would use the fabrics. You very rarely just have them as a piece of fabric on its own like that. They would normally be on something, so put onto a base, or they'd be around some kind of structure that you'd built, a supporting structure to them. So it's very rare that they really need to hold themselves like these. But it was just a nice way to start and get a little bit of a feel for how they all perform in comparison to each other. So that brings me nicely onto the next part of my experiment. So as I said just before, normally when you're working with fabric sculpting techniques, you're working onto a base of some kind or onto some kind of supporting structure. So here, what I've used is just a canvas board as my base. And then what I've done is I've used different types of fabrics to see how the different fabric hardeners actually work with them and how they look. So the different fabrics that I've used on here then is at the top is just t-shirt fabric, so just a white cotton t-shirt. Then the next one down just there is a linen, so it's a kind of a slightly beige coloured linen fabric. This one here is dishcloth, so again white cotton dishcloth. And then the bottom piece of lace there, it's a cotton lace, but as you can see there, it's quite it looks possibly more red. It's quite a sort of a russety sort of red colour, so it's got quite a strong colour to it, whereas the others are all quite pale coloured. So as you can possibly see, and certainly if I tap them, you can certainly hear, they've all hardened up beautifully. That would be absolutely what I would expect from a fabric hardener. I'd be quite happy if I was making a piece to sell or whatever. If it's hardened up like that, I'd be very, very happy that it's going to be very durable. All of them pick up the detail that you've got in the more textured fabrics really, really nicely. And what we can also see with this one is a little bit about how well they cover. So the reason for using that kind of the red colour of the lace was really just to see how well the different hardeners colour over that stronger colour. What you tend to be doing when you're doing fabric sculptures is you're working on the sculpting part of it so that you end up with something that's essentially all the same colour or very, very similar in colour, so that when you come to apply your colours over the top using your dry brushing technique, you've got a similar base across the whole of your project. So one of the problems you often have, and this particularly happens with the lighter fabric hardeners, is if you have got a piece of fabric that is coloured, particularly if it's a strong colour, then you will actually see that still through the hardener. Sometimes it could be nice and actually gives you quite a nice effect, and it's something to have a little bit of a play with, but sometimes we want to make sure that we get as good a coverage as we can. So this gives us a little bit of an idea of coverage. So the only one I would say that has really completely got rid of that red colour is the Powertex, so that darkest one there. All of the others, I'm not sure how well they show up on the camera, but certainly for me I can see that red tinge just a little bit, not so much that it's really going to cause any issues when I come to colour it, but I can just still see it there a little bit showing through. In terms of the coverage as well, sometimes people will use fabric hardeners almost as a paint. So sometimes it's quite nice to look at how well it covers a surface. I think you can probably still just see the canvas board behind through the holes in the lace. So again, that demonstrates quite nicely. The only one that really does cover up quite solidly is the Powertex again, so it's the darkest colour you've got there. The Sculptin's done a pretty good job as well, the second darkest, but the two lighter ones you can just see a little bit of the white for the canvas board showing through. Probably a second coat would have got rid of that, but it's just something worth bearing in mind, particularly if you are going to use them as a paint and you do want something a bit more opaque. So really at this point, looking at the different sections that I've got there with the different hardeners on my experimental board, the difference in terms of the hardness, there is very, very little difference there whatsoever. The coverage, there is a slight difference. Really, the main one that you're getting there is actually the colour of the hardener itself, so the actual base colour that you're going to get. But obviously we're not going to end up with that colour, we are going to apply colours over the top, so that's the next part of my experiment, to look at how well those colours go on and whether the differing shade of the base colour makes much of a difference to how the colour shows. So here's the final part of my experiment then, to see how well the fabric hardeners can be coloured. So this board was essentially exactly the same as the one that I showed you previously. So it's been done in quarters with the different fabric hardeners, which are as they're laid out there, as I did in the first part of the experiment. So the first quarter is Sculptin, second one is Paverpol, third one is Powertex, and the fourth one is my own formula. For the colour then, I've used a turquoise powdered pigment mixed with a varnish, and I've used my own kind of dry brush colouring technique with shading that I use for my own pieces. I coloured it as a complete project, so I didn't do the individual quarters separately. I did it as if it was all one thing, so that the colour was being applied the same across all of the different hardeners. And basically what can we see from this? There's very little difference, to be honest. The colour applies well to all of the fabric hardeners. It gives a good deep colour. I can get that shading on them really, really nicely. And I'd be quite happy with the results of any of those. You may make out a little bit of a difference, but it's probably more to do with my colouring and how well I've got into the folds. That is a little bit darker within the folds there, so maybe it's got a little bit more depth to it on the darker colours. And maybe the lighter ones are just a little bit lighter and brighter. You'll also see that using my technique, how I apply the colour to it, you don't see a lot of the base colour left at the end. It's only right down in the depths of the folds. So that nice shimmer that you had on the Paverpol, you don't really see it at all once the colour's been applied. In terms of how easily it went on when I was applying the colour, there's certainly a difference between the darker ones and the lighter ones. With the very, very dark, particularly the Powertex, which is very dark, the first colour that you put on, if you don't put any white into it at all, you see it but barely see it. It's quite translucent, so that dark really does come through on it. So you don't see much of a change when you put that first colour on. However, with the Paverpol and my own formula there, it stood out all right initially just on that first colour without adding any white into it. The white was really, really needed on the darker ones to actually really bring it out and add a bit more brightness to it. If I pick them up, and you can just look maybe slightly closer. So again, just looking at the textured parts, it's all coloured really, really beautifully. I've managed to get really nice shading on all of them. It hasn't made any difference. It's really popped all of the textures on them out. If I was going to be very, very slightly picky in terms of how they actually went on the Powertex, it actually went on a little bit thicker and stuck a bit heavier with the colour when it went on. I think you can possibly just about see how with the others you can still see that kind of very fine weave of the t-shirt showing through, so those lines on them. Whereas with the Powertex, it was when I actually coated the fabric, it was maybe a little bit thicker, the liquid in there. So it went on a little bit more heavily, even though I worked it in very, very well. It's maybe just that little bit thicker. Once it's dried, it's got a slightly more smooth surface, and smoother surfaces, your colour will stick a lot more too. So I think that's kind of what's happened with that. But I think from most people's perspective, certainly looking at them from a distance and just looking at them like that, there really is very, very little difference in the way that the colour's gone on. So what can I conclude from my experiments then? I think really what I can say is if you're looking for a fabric hardener to work with to make fabric sculpted projects, all of them would be absolutely fine for you to work with. They will all give you very, very similar results. And any slight differences with them will really come down to your own personal preferences. In terms of pretty much the most significant difference is the actual base colour itself that you would be working with. So I hope you found my little experiment interesting and hopefully helpful as well. Certainly if you've been looking at which one to choose, you've now got a little bit more of an idea of how they perform in relation to each other, and that actually they will all perform the task that you need them to do fabric sculpting, and they will all do it very, very well. If you do fancy giving fabric sculpting a go, please do check out my online workshops that I've got on my website at www.curiously-contrary.co.uk. All of my workshop projects can be completed using any of the brands that I've got here. So whichever one you might have at home or whichever one you can get your hands on will be absolutely fine to complete the projects that I've got on there. I also do have some workshop project kits. So if you need all the other bits and pieces to make the projects in my workshops, you can get those on my website as well. So if you are getting stuck in, absolutely have fun. And thank you for tuning in.